Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Everything You Need to Know About Student Loans. I'm Reagan Anson with Education Quest, and it's my pleasure tonight to be joined by Tom Oshner, Director of Financial Aid at Nebraska Wesleyan University here in Lincoln, and Matt Johnson, Senior Assistant Director of Financial Aid at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. Tom and Matt, thank you so much for being here with us tonight to share your expertise.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. So also to our audience members tonight, we're going to give away an insulated coffee mug or a water bottle, winner's choice to one lucky viewer. We're putting a link in the comments right now. All you have to do is click on the link to register to win. Pretty easy. And we'll announce the winner at the end of our presentation. So stay tuned for that. Also, we'll take some time at the end of this presentation to answer your questions. So please be sure to post any as you think of them in the comments as we go. And with that, let's go ahead and get into our content. My first question is really for both of you. And I was wondering if we could break down the cost of college. What costs students need to take into consideration as they're thinking about college, and how much they can expect to pay annually. And that can really differ between publics and privates. So Matt, why don't we lead with you? Would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Well, I think a good place to always start is to, especially if you're an applicant who has applied for federal financial aid, and in your award letter, you're always going to get information about costs. And it's going to be called the cost of attendance. And that's a good place to start. But it's not the place to end up on, I wouldn't say, because you really have to evaluate that thing and determine whether or not all of those costs apply and how much of those costs might directly impact the cost or not as directly. We call them direct costs and indirect costs usually when we break it out on the award letter that way, so that students get as reasonable as possible a realistic picture of what it's going to cost to go to college, what they're going to be writing checks for, because that's really what they want to know. How much am I going to be writing a check for if I go to UNK, if I go to any school that they're going to, whether it's a private, a community college, whatever, they want to know that bottom line. And so that cost of education figure is a place to start, but then you have to evaluate it for those kinds of things. So at UNK, you're going to be looking at your tuition fees as a direct cost. If you're living on campus, you might consider that a direct cost. Certainly, whether you live on or off campus, you're going to have costs associated with living. You're going to have books that may or may not be direct costs. And so for a year of school at the University of Nebraska College, Kearney, you're going to be talking about $19,000 to $20,000 that you have in direct costs. But if you look at that cost of attendance number, it's going to say 26,000. And so people wonder, that award letter thing that you sent to me, it said 26,000. Now you're talking 20,000. And it's the difference between those direct costs and the indirect costs that I've mentioned. And indirect costs are things like transportation just to get to school. Obviously, someone in Kearney, Nebraska may not have as much transportation cost as someone in outstate Nebraska somewhere, or even out of state. So they're going to have more of those kinds of costs, or other miscellaneous costs. Just because they're living and existing here in Kearney, Nebraska, you're going to have to get some toiletries. You're going to have to purchase some other items or fuel for the car or whatever it is just to be here and get along well. And so that's all built into it, but that's not what you're writing a check to UNK for. Now, not everybody applies for federal aid, so not everybody's getting that award letter, but on all of our college websites, we're going to have some sort of a web page that indicates what that cost is, both direct and indirect costs, that full cost of attendance for full-time, regular resident or non-resident students and things like that. So everybody can find it. It's more or less accessible depending on if you're a federal aid applicant or not, things of that nature.
Sure, that's helpful. Tom, what about you? How about at Nebraska Wesleyan? Can you speak to this issue a little bit?
Yeah, it's very similar. On your award letter, it's going to tell you what those direct costs are, and then also include the indirect costs. So, and those are all the sticker price. That's the beginning price, and then the financial aid kicks in. So, looking at that net cost is really important to do.
Mm-hmm. And Tom, this question back to you. How do most people end up paying for college? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, it's a mixture of everything, really. a lot of institutions are going to start out with scholarships and grants. So based on their academic performance, there's going to be merit-based aid. Then if you file the FAFSA, they're going to take a look at your financial need and see how they can fill more of those costs up by taking advantage of need-based assistance, scholarships and grants as well. If you file your FAFSA, we're going to include federal student loans on that. And so each student will know how much they can borrow each year. And then there are some families, if that isn't enough to cover everything, there are other options. You can look at the Federal Direct Parent Plus loan. You can look at private loans. And a lot of schools have interest-free monthly payment plans you can set up to kind of budget that cost out over the course of a semester versus a lump sum payment right at the beginning of the term.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful.
You know, and could I mention one thing
please.
about that? You know, how do most people pay for college? I wouldn't want to neglect, and especially since we might have viewers here thinking about planning for college, I wouldn't want them to neglect their own resources that they might have. Tom talked about the college input as far as grants and scholarships and the loan that's offered through the federal aid, but I would want people to research their own ability, maybe whether it's a college savings plan or other savings that they have. Starting that kind of a plan, even if it's late in the game here a little bit where you've only got a year or two left before your student is going on to college or whatever it is, and or looking at things that I can't really know that the family might have available to them, be that some sort of financing, a line of credit that they personally might have access to, or some sort of a retirement vehicle that has a built-in educational benefit or something like that. So looking at all of those things holistically and not just only thinking about what can the college put into this, but what resources do I have available to me that I haven't maybe even thought about yet.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. So Matt, back to you. Let's talk about student loans specifically and how students get them, how they apply for them.
Okay, so let's start with, there's really two basic types of loans that a family can look into in this: federal loans or private loans. We're going to start with the federal loans because that's what I would hope every family starts with, because for the most part, those federal loans are probably going to have the most generous terms and conditions associated with them as compared to other things that you might find in the marketplace as far as a private loan or something of that nature, which doesn't make those other things bad, but just different and maybe not as student or family friendly, depending on the type of federal loan that you're getting. Where does it all start? Well, it also is going to start with the federal aid application, the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid. And so families should apply there. Now, as families receive what we would call offer letters, they are offered an amount of financial aid, and having done the FAFSA, they will figure out how much federal aid they get, maybe other institutional or state assistance that they get in grant funds. But then in addition to that are the loan funds that are offered to them. And those loan funds are going to be limited. When you're talking about the federal direct student loans that are a part of most offer letters, sometimes federal direct parent loans are a part of the offer letter too, depending on the school. Not all schools list the parent loan option. It's almost always available at schools, but certainly the federal student loan is, and rarely does that student loan by itself offer enough assistance to be able to cover the full cost of education, or maybe even the tuition cost at most schools. That probably won't even totally cover that. It is limited by grade level. So a dependent freshman, and by dependent I mean a person who has parent application data that's required on the FAFSA, they're going to get $5,500 as a freshman, and then it goes up a little bit as they attain grade levels of sophomore and junior status. It goes up to $6,500 for those sophomores, $7,500 for juniors. If a student does happen to be independent, there's a little bit of an extra that they can get in addition to that, that might go a little further for that independent student. But most of our students at UNK, as a traditional kind of coming right out of high school, college with traditional students, they're going to have those lower numbers, the $5,500 as a freshman starting out. And that doesn't really go very far a lot of times. As far as how to then proceed with those federal loans, once it's offered on that offer letter, the school is going to have some mechanism usually by which they can accept the loan and complete the application process to get those loans. And the school usually kind of leads them through that as they log on to the portal that they're accepting the loans within. So that's the federal loans. But then you have a whole nother side of the story, which is private student loans that a lot of schools can lead a student towards. At UNK, we have a listing of lenders that we list as a historical listing. Other schools have a preferred listing. The difference between the two is that our historical listing just simply lists what lenders students have used in the past couple of years. Some schools go out and they determine a preferred listing. Bottom line is, though, it's a listing. It gives the person a starting place because a family really isn't limited to only that list. They can go into the marketplace and choose any private loan lender they choose to go with. But when you're talking about applying for the private loan, then that's going to be a process by which the parent, the student together, usually students need co-signers. They go to the marketplace, they figure out which lender they want to utilize. They try to figure out which terms are the best for them and works best and where the lowest interest rates might be and things like that. And then they apply for the loan. They apply for the loan. That lender will usually send to the school some information by which the school needs to certify the fact that, yes, indeed, this is a student going to UNK in my case, or whatever school it's at, and that they're eligible for up to X amount of dollars. And we send that information back to the lender, and that really kind of completes the process for the student in applying for it. The lender ultimately then sends the funding to the school as soon as it's eligible to be sent to the school.
Great. Back to you, Tom. Can you talk a little bit about some of the benefits and drawbacks of student loan as a type of aid? What are the great, I guess, the benefits and drawbacks? And also, do you want to explain a little bit how loan interest works?
Well, some of the benefits, Matt talked about how the federal direct loan program is probably going to offer you your best interest rate and some of the best benefits as far as repaying those loans. So, if a student needs to borrow, those are really some of the best loans that you're going to want to look at. College is an investment, and sometimes taking out a loan is putting into that investment, and it hopefully will pay off with the education that you've received to either advance you into a really good job or allow you to get into the next level of education, a graduate degree. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of your question.
I was just, I know you touched briefly on loan interest and, different places offering different levels of interest rates. And can you explain maybe how that works a little bit, how interest works on federal loans in particular? Yeah,
with the federal loans, interest, it depends quite a bit on your FAFSA. So depending on your financial need, taking into account the parent's income, assets, the student's income and assets, how many are in the household, lots of variables. The government's going to tell us kind of what your expected family contribution is at this point in time. It's going to change, called the Student Aid Index in the future, but it's going to let us know, what your financial need is. And so if a student has enough financial need that hasn't been met with other financial resources from the school or outside sources, such as an outside scholarship, we can offer what's called a subsidized federal direct loan. And so those loans do not accrue any interest for the students while they're in school. They wouldn't start accruing until students graduated or ceased enrollment of at least half time. So great loan for students to get, not accruing any interest. You just have the principal balance. So if a student wanted to, if they had saved up enough money and paid that loan off by the time they graduated, it wouldn't accrue any interest. Great deal. But for students whose financial need has been met, they still can borrow through the federal direct loan program, and the interest would accrue. It would be called an unsubsidized federal direct loan. Interest would accrue while they're in school. They are not required to make any payments while they're in school, but certainly would help if they could pay some of that interest down while they're in school. But once they graduate, any interest that has accrued but hasn't been paid would get capitalized and added to the principal amount of the loan. So then you're starting to accrue a little interest on top of interest, which not a great thing, but it's still a lower interest rate. And it's a good loan for the student to take if they really need that assistance to help pay for their expenses.
Absolutely. You're talking to someone who had all unsubsidized federal loans right here. So I remember writing those interest checks while I was in school, and I'm really glad that I paid it as I went.
Yes, absolutely.
That's good advice. So speaking as we talk about loans, obviously students are incurring debt as they take these out to go to school, which is it's an investment, right? College is expensive, but it's a good investment, and over time, college going people will earn much more over their lifetime than people who don't go to school. But I want to talk to you both a little bit about the typical student loan debt that you see, what that looks like for seniors who are graduating from each of your institutions. Matt, do you want to lead off with that?
Sure, I can do that. At UNK, and we publish this each year as our seniors are graduating. And this last semester, spring of 23, debt at UNK was a little over $17,000. And it's actually fluctuated between a little over $20,000 to around that. Right now, when we publish how much debt students leave UNK with, we are publishing only what students at UNK have borrowed. So if, in other words, if they transferred to UNK with some debt, we're not counting that as UNK debt, for example. So if I think about it holistically, I would say a lot of students coming out of UNK having their bachelor's degree are going to be somewhere right around 20,000 in borrowing debt as far as their federal loans go. I don't have good data on how much more students might have if they have private loans on top of that. I wouldn't say it would be a whole lot more though, just based on overall volume, but it would skew it up a little bit if I did an average across the student body.
Sure. Tom, how about at Wesleyan?
Yeah, so at Nebraska Wesleyan, very similar. I help with some of the institutional reporting that schools have to do. And so there's a thing called the Common Data Set. And so we do take a look at students who started at Nebraska Wesleyan and graduated. And of those students, our federal debt average is $23,000 per a student. Now, we also do take a look at those who are borrowing private loans. We exclude the parent loans because that's parent loan. But for students who also borrow private loans, the total amount of debt, including private and federal, would be right about $30,000 for those who started at Wesleyan and graduated with a degree.
Got it. So, Tom, this question back to you. So once the students graduated, they're gone, starting to work their first job. There are different options for repayment, especially on those federal loans. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, you have a standard repayment, which would be about typically 10 years. But the government does have quite a few programs, and they're certainly trying to narrow them down. So it's very simple for students when they graduate, but they do have basically an income-based repayment plan. So, you know, as you first graduate, you might not be earning as much as you will say, hopefully 10 years down the road. They make your payments smaller and really kind of go with how much you're earning. And as you increase in salary or earnings throughout the years, then those payments start to increase. So it's able to get that loan paid back.
Sure. And there are things like deferment. If things, you know, something happens in life, there's a job loss or, you know, something like that there. I think what we try to tell people, and I'm sure you do as well, is the best option is to talk to your lender and to see let them know what's going on in your life, and they can help you find the best option for that repayment plan for you. So, Matt, as you see at UNK, on average, how long does it really take someone to pay back their student loans? Are most people taking 10, 15, 20 years? What do you see the most of?
Well, I think a lot of that is based on which repayment plan they're in. I don't have great research data on it takes our students 12 and a half years on average to pay back their loan. All I can really speak to is the term of the loan and assuming that they're going to be somewhere within that term. So the standard term repayment when they leave school initially is 10 years.
Okay.
And I'm assuming a lot of our students hit that 10-year mark with repayment. But for those who need one of those income type plans, income derived payment plans, it could take them up to 20 years. So I know it's going to be, in most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, it's somewhere between 10 and 20 years that most of our students are paying off loans on average. Can it be longer than that? Sure, it can be. If they have enough deferments and forbearances, that could extend it out there a few more years. If they're in some plans, it can go as far as 25 years in the standard repayment if they've consolidated their loans and have 30,000 or more in debt and some of those kinds of things. It can go up to 25 years. I wouldn't think it necessary to go that long because I would think they would be doing an income type plan that usually would cut it to 20. But it can be longer than that, but on average, somewhere between 10 and 20 years. And I think for our students, at least, it's probably closer to that 10-year mark for many of our students.
Sure. That's great. So this question I want to pose to both of you as we sort of wrap this section up. What's the best advice that you would give our viewers about student loans, just in general? Tom, I'll pass it to you first.
Okay. If you have to take out a loan, you're going to want to go with those federal direct loans first, and then supplement that with additional private or parent loans. Staying in contact with your loan servicer, very important. Make sure they've got your current address, email. I mean, as soon as you get that loan, you will hopefully get contacted by them. And in that communication, please don't throw things out, from any type of lending agencies until you take a look at it, because it could be your lender trying to give you some very important information. But all of these loan servicers, you can log into their website, create your account. And so that way you're always going to be able to check on your loans to make sure, yes, these have been dispersed and this is how much interest I've accrued. And the other is, depending on what type of an occupation or career you go into, there is some cancellation benefits that can go along with those. So if you go into teaching, or if you're doing a public service loan career, so, working as an officer or a firefighter or something along those lines, you could have some of your loans canceled. So just be aware of all the benefits that go with these loans. And you're going to have to go through entrance counseling, and when you graduate, you're going to have to go through exit counseling. So they'll keep reminding you of all of your rights and responsibilities, but just stay in touch with your loan servicer and make sure you understand all of the great things that go along with these loans besides having to pay them back.
Yeah, excellent advice. Matt, how about you? Any other advice that you'd give our viewers?
The only other thing I would add to it, a couple of things, and it's probably cliche in my office. The number of times I've said it is probably approaching infinite, but borrow only what you need.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There are families and students, they see the sticker price, that cost of education number we kind of started talking with, and they think, well, I must need it all. Mm-hmm. And they borrow it all, and they don't really research well my actual need for something is. And or the student takes it all and they think that they've come into some sort of bonus round with the extra money that they have, and they're not really planning out what their rent will be in December, and they're spending it all in August on pizza and parties or whatever it might be. Hopefully not, but you get the idea that this money comes to you and it's in some ways easy to get, and it feels easy, and I've got it, and I'm not got a lot of life experience yet, and so I'm spending it. And that $12-15 pizza I bought, when you talk about it with interest, you've suddenly bought a $20-25 pizza. Or whatever it is. So just making sure that you're borrowing only what you're needing for your education. And then when you do get it, and if you get monies left over that's in your account from those loan proceeds, to make sure you're spending it only on your educational expenses, so that it's the investment that we talk about it being. Yeah. Otherwise, it becomes more of a burden when you're spending it on things that aren't your education. So doing that for yourself. And then the other piece I would add to that is thinking about it a little more long term. Yeah, we have that initial need to pay for school, but think about it long term in the sense that it's my future salary that has to pay this thing back. And what is reasonable for me, and what is reasonable for my salary to be able to pay back, and still, when I get out of school, to afford my rent and my insurance and my food bill and whatever else that you have as as you're adulting into that new career that you have and things like that. You know, it's that new career that you have that has to pay back the loan, and will it really support 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40,000 in debt? Be realistic about that. And if some fields have better salaries than others, realize that and research that and do what's right for you still, but with eyes wide open to the realities of payback on those loans eventually.
Absolutely. That's just great advice. So I want to thank both of you so much for sharing your insight. It's incredibly valuable. And great information for students and families, because they're starting to think about how best to pay for college in the next year or two. Before we move on to audience questions, I just want to remind everyone of some of the free resources we offer at Education Quest. We're putting a link in the comments right now, and you can find out a ton of information about the FAFSA and access all the tools that you need to complete that form. And of course, that's one of the ways that you can apply for student loans. There's also an amazing resource on our website for scholarships called Scholarship Quest. It's a database of more than 2,000 Nebraska-based scholarships that you can search and see what type of awards you can apply for. And remember, scholarships are free. So that's free money that doesn't have to be paid back. So keep that in mind. Now, if you guys are up for it, we'll just take maybe a couple of audience questions. And I'll let you decide who wants to take the question. But one is, what if I don't get offered a loan? What are my options?
Well, if you fill out your FAFSA, the school will automatically award you a loan as part of that financial aid offer letter. If you don't fill out a FAFSA, then yeah, you wouldn't be offered a federal loan at that point in time, and you would pretty much be limited to a private education loan.
So that FAFSA, filing that FAFSA is key to.
It really is. Yeah. Not only does it allow us the opportunity to see what we can do to help with possible financial need, scholarships and grants, but it does allow us the opportunity to award you that federal loan that you might need to help pay for some of your expenses.
Okay, awesome. One question is specific to parents getting loans. Can parents get loans? Matt, I think you may have mentioned a Parent Plus loan. Can you explain what that is a little bit more for our audience?
So hopefully the student is receiving scholarships, some grants, their own student loans first, but maybe that's not quite covering all of the expense. And at that point, the parent can step in with the federal parent loan and borrow for some of the rest of the expense that they might have. The parent can essentially borrow up to that cost of education number that's listed on the award letter, minus the other financial assistance that is there on that award notice, on that offer letter. So the parent, sometimes a school will offer that as part of the financial assistance. Some schools do, some schools don't. But whether they do or don't, the parent may borrow, and it's probably going to start with that parent being approved for that loan at studentaid.gov, which is the same place where the family went to do the FAFSA. I should also mention it can only be a dependent student's parents that apply for that parent loan. And that would be true whether they're the parents doing the FAFSA or not, because sometimes we have separated parents and separated households that way. And so it can be either parent or set of parents, whatever it is, even a step parent for that matter. But the parent then may borrow for the rest of that expense, having done the application, which has a little bit of a credit approval, and the promissory note following that.
And
I would add to that, there's the federal Parent Plus loan. And if you're thinking about private loans where the parent's going to be co-signing on that, it's always a good idea. And I always recommend to families, if they have any questions, it's always good to at least look at the private loan market just to see what type of an interest rate you would get depending on your credit. You could be at something that's similar to what the federal government offers, or it could be more. You never know. But most of the private loans don't take fees off of the top of the loan where the federal government does.
Yep.
And then one other question is specific to private loans. What is a safe private loan? Can you speak to that at all? I assume they're meaning, how do you know it's a good lender? Or, is this something you go to your local bank? Can you speak to that?
Most local banks are not in the private education loan market anymore. It's some of the larger ones. as Matt mentioned, most schools will have either at least a preferred lender list or historical list. At Wesleyan, we use the same as UNK. We have a historical list that our students and parents have used over the past 3 academic years. So we're just trying to give people an idea that these are loans that parents and students have used. And so in our opinion, they're, reputable loans. But again, you could do an internet search and find many other lenders that aren't on our list. But I would like to say that anybody that has preferred or historical list is giving you some pretty good, accurate recommendations as far as where to maybe start looking.
That's great. That's very helpful. So we're running out of time. So just want to, first of all, thank everyone for the great questions. And if we didn't get to yours tonight, call our office tomorrow. We'll be happy to help you out. And before we wrap up and get to our prize drawing, I just want to remind our audience that the best way to stay up to date with everything college planning related is follow Education Quest on all the social media channels. We're on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you follow us or like us, you'll get a chance to win a $500 Get Social scholarship just by doing that. It's the easiest scholarship money you'll ever earn. And there's a link, we're putting a link in the comments right now also for our Countdown to College e-newsletter that'll keep you up to date on all the important deadlines and give you great advice on college planning. You can also make an appointment at Education Quest for free help with your FAFSA or any other college planning related questions. So just go to educationquest.org for location information, phone numbers, etc. And now I think we're ready for our prize drawing. The winner is Michael Geibler. So Michael, you're the winner of either a free water bottle or coffee mug. We'll reach out to you via email with details. Well, thank you both again, Tom and Matt, so much for joining us and sharing your expertise. It's so helpful. And thank you all to our audience for joining us as well. And we'll see you right back here on July 19th at 7 p.m. when we'll tell you how to deck out your dorm room on a dime. So we'll see you then. Thanks so much.